Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Tuesday's edition, and we're broadcasting from our studios in Irvine, California. Happy to have you with us today. And folks, we've got a lot to cover today, and some of it's good news, but unfortunately some of it's really not. It's been a tough couple days, but let's talk a little bit about the economic news hitting us, because there's a mixed bag of information there. You know, consumer confidence surveys came out. We actually hit a number of 104. Economists had been expecting a reading somewhere around 100. To put that in perspective, the February number was 102. Anytime you're above 100, that is a good number. So effectively what happened, the debacles that happened with Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank did not really appear to spill over into the general economy of the United States. Why? Well, you know, we gave some federal officials credit for the actions they took over that weekend, but overall, consumers felt pretty good about their positions. So that's the good news story. Again, a 104 reading up from 102 in February, when economists had thought, hey, you know, we could actually see a decline in confidence, but that did not happen. Now, that's the good news that we have here. Bad news, if you could call it that, the Disney company announced another 7,000 layoffs. Again, not a surprise. Wall Street had been expecting this. However, they joined a laundry list of Fortune 500 companies. These are the 500 largest companies in the country in announcing additional layoffs. And yet, we still haven't seen those numbers percolate through the unemployment report. Unemployment is still standing 3.7%, historically low numbers. But Disney did announce that. Again, it was no surprise. And irony among ironies, as some of the big tech companies have made their announcements, their stock prices actually went up. You say, well, Mark, why did the stock prices go up when they announced layoffs? Well, more efficiency on the cost side of the business. That's what Wall Street was looking for. So that is one of those situations where, as it percolates its way through the economy, we're going to have to see what the effects are on that. Will it spill over? Well, so far it hasn't happened. Certain industries are going through some pain right now, a la commercial real estate. Think about it. Are you really surprised, folks? Particularly in two cities. San Francisco, which is the epicenter of the problem, and then New York City, which again is pretty much in the same boat. What happened? Well, when the work at home craze happened during the pandemic, a lot of people have not still come back to the office. Now, some employers are mandating that people do come back, but it's 3 days a week, 4 days a week. And all of a sudden, that demand for the office space, of which people during the pandemic paid a hefty premium, all of a sudden it's not there anymore. You know, they had all these leases signed, and now some of that debt is coming due over the course of the next year. And what's going to happen, folks, some of the people that own these buildings are going to have to pay higher interest rates, because during the pandemic, they financed it at rock bottom rates. Well, that debt is generally a floating rate debt, meaning it's not a fixed interest rate, and those costs are going to go up. Now, Wall Street has seen this coming for a while. Real estate investment trusts tied to commercial real estate have been plunging over the past few months. So again, the market saw it in advance. Now, you put that on top of some of the other issues that some of the banks had related to how they managed their portfolio, and you could have a double whammy here. But again, some parts of the economy doing well, other parts are not. People have long been talking about the decline in residential real estate prices. Well, they spiked incredibly high to a point where when interest rates rose like they did, and 30-year fixed rate mortgages now are above 6.75%, by definition, higher interest rates are going to slow demand for mortgages. So residentials may have some issues before us, but the quality of the loans and the credit scores are way, way superior to what happened back in 07, 8, and 9 when we had the real estate collapse. You've seen the stories about, I won't get into it, but people buying multiple houses, didn't have jobs, didn't have income, everything was fake. That's not the case now. So my expectation is, yes, we're going to see some fallout from the commercial real estate. Certain banks who ties in with New York and San Francisco lending, but aggregately throughout the entire economy, no, I don't think that's going to be something that's going to pull us down significantly. Now, there's a lot of strategists on Wall Street who are saying, hey, the U.S. economy came out, the Federal Reserve, and said our growth rate for the year is going to be 0.4%. Well, folks, we had better growth than that, in January and February. First quarter results haven't been released because we're not out of the quarter yet. But that would signal to me that, if we're going to be flat the rest of the year, we could be in that shallow recession already. When you're talking about 0.5% down to 0.4% growth, I don't know who's good enough to measure that. I certainly don't think the Fed is, based upon how they, quote, misread some situations. And again, the prevailing mood on Wall Street, and don't get me wrong, the prevailing mood is not always right, is saying, hey, the Fed kept interest rates too low for too long, and now they've raised them too fast. Look, you can't have it both ways. You can make those comments, but the reality is the system was flooded with money, literally flooded with money when the economy was shut down back in 2020. And as things gradually got a little bit better in 2021 and in 2022, well, now we're stuck with the excess. And it is going to be painful as it unwinds, as we've already seen. So some economists, some strategists on the street are saying, hey, we're heading to recession. Some people say it's going to be a soft landing. Doesn't that make you feel good? A soft landing. Others are saying, no, this is going to be a hard landing. They're using the airplane analogy, of course. I'm sort of in the camp, I think we're going to have a small recession. But again, as we've said on this show many times, you don't have recessions when unemployment's under 4%. It just doesn't happen. Now, inflation is still running too hot. Okay, it's running about 5%. The Fed, by the end of this year, is going to try to get it into the 3s, and sometime in 2024 into the 2s. Don't know if they'll get there or not. But they really have a delicate issue to deal with here. Rates have risen so much to a point now where, again, there's a lag, folks. But these rates are higher. It will slow the economy, and there's a concern about the regional banks. There does seem to be stability from deposits fleeing. That has not borne itself out like some people expected. Those that wanted to got out early. The Silicon Valley Bank situation, they moved to money center banks. We need an effective regional banking system in this country, but there's a concern that, if more depositors leave, that's going to be less available capital to be able to lend out, and that could further help slow the economy. We'll see how it plays itself out. But speaking of that, there were hearings on Capitol Hill today by the regulators being asked by senators, explain to us what happened here. Because particularly in Silicon Valley Bank, it was governed, the regulated, better term, by the San Francisco Fed. Well, there were officials talking about it today. What happened? Same old story we've been telling you for weeks, about the mismanagement of the assets and the liabilities. Banking 101, they didn't follow some of those rules. Concentration issues, yeah, they had that too. But there was also some of their own customers probably facilitated the run on the bank. So again, regulators had their turn to talk today. We will soon hear from bank executives, I'm expecting. So, but again, for right now, again, I adhere to the cockroach theory. If you see one or two, there's probably more. But right now, there have been two significant failures, Silicon Valley Bank and then Signature Bank, and they have somewhat been contained. It appears. The market hasn't really gone up or down. It stayed somewhat flat. But a lot of strategists, they're out there giving you the warnings, and we'll see how it plays. But my expectation is that the economy's going to bounce along. When we have unemployment under 4%, inflation may come down from 5 to 4, which would be a good thing. It's still too high, folks. It's double where the Fed wants it. I've never understood what was so magical about 2%. I thought they ought to try to go between 0 and 1. But what do I know? I've only been doing it for a long time. All right, let me talk to you about a couple other things here. One other thing, late breaking story here related to financials. Sam Bankman Fried, the infamous former CEO of FTX, the crypto bad boy, hit with another charge today, charge of bribery by trying to bribe a Chinese official. I think the bribe was $40 million to free up some $1 billion worth of crypto assets tied up in China. So add that to the laundry list of charges against Sam Bankman Fried. And there's other issues in the crypto business. I mean, to me, I wouldn't touch this industry, but a lot of people have. There's a lot of capital tied up in it. Binance Corporation, the largest crypto exchange, their founder's been hit with SEC charges. There's some concern about Coinbase, another exchange. Folks, if the SEC and the Federal Reserve and the other government agencies want to go after these firms and cripple this business, they'll do so. And you inflict the pain on the exchanges with the regulatory authority that they have, and it's going to be painful for crypto investors. Having said that, certain crypto assets have rallied. Again, I can't explain it because I'm not an advocate of it. But it's another class of, quote, opportunity, if you will. Some people don't understand why people invest in gold. Crypto's another one. We'll see. But again, anytime you hear subpoenas, regulation, which obviously in the wake of what's happened in that industry was long overdue, but these two firms are going to have to deal with some pretty pressing issues. Now, let me move on. There was some obviously horrific news over the past couple days. What happened in Nashville, where that transgender, I guess it used to be a man, now it became a woman. That's my understanding. Thank goodness for the Nashville police. They got there within 6 minutes. Police officers literally putting their lives on the line, and eventually one of the Nashville police officers took out the transgender killer, who unfortunately by the time she had finished their work, 3 students were dead and 3 administrators were dead. It's senseless. Now, the typical reaction, you've got Democrats, let's ban assault weapons. That's the typical response. Here again, we have a crazy person. This person had put together a manifesto, and apparently from reports we're hearing, just went in and fired indiscriminately, killing whatever he could kill. It used to be a he, now it's a she. Again, this is a horrific situation, but the blame goes with the person that pulled the trigger. The blame doesn't go elsewhere. And that, Democrats always try to do this anytime there's one of these events, and unfortunately there have been way too many of these events. But again, it's not the gun's fault. It's the person that pulled the trigger. Now, regulations, we've never fought back against that stuff on this show. But again, I just hate seeing when events like this happen, it gets politicized. And that's the country we live in right now, unfortunately. So, to the people in Nashville, I'm quite familiar with it, went to school about an hour away from there. What a very difficult situation, and your hearts go out when you see something like this. And then we got news earlier today that at least 39 people have been killed at a detention facility, in Juarez, Mexico, right outside the U.S. border. That was a U.S.-Mexican immigration facility. Evidently, it caught fire. There's at least 39 casualties there, maybe quite a bit more. Again, it happened, okay, but fire's a fire. But again, when you look at the border policies of the Biden administration, it's a horrific policies, and it's leading to, again, this is not the administration's fault, okay, but indirectly the policies contributed towards this. The same thing with the drugs coming across the border. It's just, this open border policy that they're doing is not working. And one of the things that I'm hoping the Republicans do, who now control the House of Representatives, is that they can get some exposure to what is happening down there. The Democratic Party seems to not have a care in the world about it. But again, things like this happen. And then, it's just a bad read on things when you see all the issues happening across the country right now. We've got economic problems. Yes, they're being dealt with. We've got border problems. Okay, the men and women of the Border Patrol do a great job, but the policies and the leadership is just atrocious. So, again, people talk about Republican policies. Well, again, when Republicans were in charge, the policies were a lot better than they were now. The escalation of the problems really has come to the forefront. And again, that was an example of something that occurred here. So, very unfortunate situation. And then, shifting to other issues that the United States is dealing with right now, we have the continued war in Ukraine. Now, there's news reports out about the Russians possibly pulling back some of their forces along certain fronts, which could be a good thing. At the end of the day, the Ukrainians, again, their country was attacked. Military analysts are speculating they're going to have to mount a spring offensive, and in an effort to take back some of the land that the Russians have seized. That's going to be bloody battles. It's going to be difficult, and it's going to be challenging. But it's interesting, NATO and the U.S. and European countries have stepped up to try and provide the Ukrainians with weapons and ammunition. But a story caught our attention today about an ammo factory, I think it's in Norway, that they make artillery. Well, artillery is in huge demand right now. Actually, demand's up 15-fold from what it was prior to the war. The problem is, the factory is located near a TikTok data center, and the data center is using up all the electricity. Folks, that's one of the issues these technology companies have come under fire. They always want to do the woke agenda and, ESG investing, and everything's got to be green. The fact of the matter is, a lot of these data centers, and I'm not just picking on TikTok because it's in the news, but in this case, you've got a data center next to a factory. The factory needs to produce more ammunition. It wants to produce more ammunition, but it doesn't have enough electricity because TikTok's draining it. That's not an isolated issue. These data centers are heavy uses of electricity. And yet you have all the environmentalists out there, just everything's got to be green. Well, these data centers take up a lot of power. So again, it goes back here. Again, I could get on the energy policy, a balanced approach between renewables and oil. All this stuff ties in, folks. Okay, so again, the factory, you try to make humor of it. Basically, the CEO said, hey, there's a bunch of cat videos on TikTok. Instead of us being able to make ammunition, artillery for the Ukrainians. Sad but true story. So, again, issues plaguing us. It's sort of a, mixed bag of things out there. But one thing's not a mixed bag, folks, and it's crystal clear. Crime in these deep blue cities has just escalated. We had another issue yesterday, an incident that came out. Rand Paul, one of his staffers, remember Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, he personally was attacked and assaulted, had 6 ribs broken, had numerous other injuries a couple years ago. Well, one of the members of his staff, what was he doing wrong? He went to have a lunch at a Mexican restaurant about 1.5 miles from the Capitol in Washington, D.C. 5:30 in the afternoon, a 42-year-old black man just out of prison. He'd served 12 years in prison. He'd just had gotten out the day before, and somehow, according to the guy, well, someone said something, my brain started talking to me, and I was forced to do it. And what does he do? He assaults Rand Paul's staffer, apparently with a knife. And he had life-threatening injuries. Apparently he's in the hospital. His name hasn't been released. But here, right in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., a staffer, Saturday afternoon, sunlight, sunny. This isn't something happened at night. 1.5 minutes from the Capitol, 1.5 miles from the Capitol. And this happens. Again, folks, we don't want to escalate issues, but it's happening all across the country. You have district attorneys in New York and in Southern California, Los Angeles, who maybe it's political pressure, but it seems like the perpetrators of the crime get more of the benefit than the victims. Cases get undercharged. There's advocates for the criminals. This is happening in New York City. So again, you look at the policies, and ultimately, some of these Soros-backed district attorneys, and I could pick out other cities, St. Louis, San Francisco, LA, Washington. It's happening in all our liberal cities. And why do you think crime goes up? People feel they're not going to have to do time because of the crimes they commit. Crime's going to go up. So we hate talking about individual instances, but again, Rand Paul's situation, again, he was an assault victim himself, and now one of his staffers is, fighting to survive. All because some guy got out of prison, wasn't even out one day, and committed another crime. Very, very, very sad situation. And then, you hear the stories of government overreach. Well, we talked about the Twitter stories with Matt Taibbi. He's the one that broke the Twitter files story about all the censorship that the Democrats and their allies in the what I'll call the Twitterverse were doing prior to Elon Musk acquiring it. Well, lo and behold, when the IRS shows up at Matt Taibbi's house. The IRS isn't supposed to show up at your house. That's a blatant intimidation. Fortunately for him, his tax returns that were audited, everything was okay. But again, these strong-arm tactics, and you hear stories about them. Well, Jim Jordan, chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House, he's had enough. And he's going to call people in to testify in this and find out what was the basis of the IRS going to Matt Taibbi's home. I mean, yeah, people get audited all the time. Happens frequently. But they normally send you a letter and then you schedule a meeting at the IRS office. People going out to his home? Seems like a strong-arm tactic to me. Now, in other international news, things in Israel, and I'm going to ask Jeffrey about this on Thursday, things seem to be calming down a little bit. Benjamin Netanyahu, the head of Israel, Israel's president, tried to initiate some judicial reforms, and it was met with fierce resistance. I mean, Netanyahu fired his defense minister. There was literally a huge protest all throughout Israel. And fortunately, I think in this case, Netanyahu stepped back and said, hey, we'll try to reach a compromise here. And so Israel, which, staunch U.S. ally, I mean, it was pretty shaky over there. Serious opposition to the policy. A lot of demonstrations in the streets, concern over the Israeli Defense Forces' ability to function. And now a little more calm. So for whatever reason, Netanyahu is pledged to work with opposition parties as they try to reach some type of compromise on, an internal Israeli issue. We're glad to report that news, because the last thing we need right now with all the instability is to have problems in Israel. And then late-breaking news today, former Vice President Mike Pence has been asked by a federal judge to testify in ongoing case against former President Trump. In other words, what did Pence and Trump, how did that conversation go prior to January 6th? Now, Pence, there's certain things, he has rights also, now as a private citizen, and certain things he did while acting as the president of the Senate, he can't be questioned on that, but they're interested in, private conversations that Trump had with him. Pence has a right to fight this, by the way. I mean, it's not like he's going to be in court next week. And I do fully expect him to, because, conversations between the president and vice president are considered, private conversations. But in this case, the federal judge has said, no, this falls outside that bound. So we'll see. Keep an eye on that one too. We'll see where that one goes. And then, again, we're never too shy away from politics here, are we? Okay. There actually is an election coming up quite soon. The mayor of Chicago's race. Remember Lori Lightfoot? She was defeated. Well, the top two that came out of that race, Paul Vallas and then Brandon Johnson, were the top two vote getters. Well, Vallas leads Johnson right now about 6-7 points in polling. The interesting thing about it is Vallas is very pro-police, and Johnson is more in the camp of defund the police. Well, to nobody's surprise, younger people in Chicago they're supporting Johnson, and the sort of over 45, under 45, and the people over 45 are primarily supporting Vallas. Does that tell you something about where we are as a society? But that election's coming up. Obviously, we take sides with Paul Vallas, and we hope he wins, because we do need Chicago's been beset by all kind of issues. I mean, we've talked about it, ad nauseum, and there's a lot of issues they have to deal with in the city. But you certainly don't want to do anything to weaken the police in the city, for goodness sake. So, at least on this show, and we're pulling for Paul Vallas to become the next mayor of Chicago. And anyone that's pro-police, we're going to support that. So again, folks, a hodgepodge, mixed bag of things today. Some good news economically, some horrific news on another mass shooting, horrific news down on the border. Tough news as usual coming out of Ukraine. And you have the China-Russian alliance. We talked about that earlier. That seems to be strained a little bit right after Putin and Xi were shaking hands in Moscow for a couple days. So again, as always, we'll cut through the propaganda. We'll cut through what's happening. But one thing I want to point to sort of close out with today, and not raising the alarm flag, but I'm going to raise it a little bit. There has been virtually nothing between the White House and the House Republicans on negotiations over the debt ceiling limit. Republicans in Congress want some substantial cuts in discretionary spending. And President Biden and the White House have said, no, we want an unconditional raise in the debt limit. These are bills, money already spent, and the bills are coming due. Nothing has happened. And again, the clock is sort of ticking to where sometime late May, early June, I can see this happening. Folks, we've seen it before. Though Congress will go right up to the last minute, markets will get roiled, and it's going to take an outside event to get people to think straight. But they do need to have some compromise here. And Republicans still have to produce a budget. The White House one was considered dead on arrival, so the Republican budget still has to come out. But again, Democrats are digging in their heels. They're saying, we're not negotiating. Well, if you don't negotiate, then one of two outcomes happens. We're going to get right up to the point again, and I can see this movie happening. And they'll come right up on the edge, and then somebody will blink. Or they will reach an agreement. I don't know. But at this point, the differences are so wide. I don't, right now, there's no progress whatsoever. So I'm reporting it to you because that's what's really happening. You'll hear Republicans spend, that we have to do this. We have to have some cuts, spending out of control. Democrats say, no, these are money we spent. It's already passed by Congress. We've got to pay for it. But at the end of the day, we do not want to have a default, folks. With all the other issues that we're facing, particularly with the potential of the economy potentially going into recession, that's the last thing this country needs. But anyhow, we will update you as progress warrants, but right now, it literally is a stalemate. Nothing is happening on it. Okay, so look, we'll be back on Thursday. We've got a lot to talk about then. We'll keep you appraised as always, any developments that happen, and hopefully some common sense can exist in Congress where our Republican Democratic colleagues who work together can come up with solutions that work for the American people. Thanks for watching. Thanks for viewing today. We will be back on Thursday. See you then.